My last piece of olive. I want to do a rectangular bowl, and I'm debating whether to try to get as much out of this as I can or make it smaller like some other rectangular bowls that I've made. I may try to follow the golden ratio. The trouble is I've got this bark inclusion where I've picked the bark out and there's a bark hole here. There are some splits in it here which seem to extend down to the bark inclusion, and there's a split over here. Whereas if I made it about that size, I'd be able to get around all of the splits. Contemplation time. After careful consideration, I think I'm going to make it a lot smaller. So this right now is about 250 millimeters. I normally work in imperial, but I find when I'm working with the golden ratio, it's a lot easier to work with millimeters. So I'm going to start by cutting it off at 200, and that should take care of a lot of the cracks here. And then there's a few cracks down at this end, and I'm going to take off maybe another 10 to 20 millimeters. And that should bring me, to make it with the golden ratio, just shy of this big bark inclusion. It would be neat to be able to put that into the thing, but it's pretty unstable and there's a lot of cracks around it, so I think it would actually be a detriment to the finished piece. When it's done, it'll be approximately the size of this piece of wood here, albeit a little bit thinner. I'm glad I decided to take the end off of it, because when I got in there, the crack actually extends away to the other side where I cut, and it's definitely fragile. It's falling apart, and I wouldn't want that to happen to a platter that I give to somebody as a gift. That one doesn't quite want to break, but it's almost. Yeah, there it goes. That crack actually extends to right there. Now, the crack doesn't show up on either of the faces, so I'm going to try cutting down the other side to get rid of the cracks there. And if it's going to get too short, I'm just going to put a little bit of CA glue in there. Should do the trick. As a side note, it smells a lot like olives. There's the milled piece of olive. For comparison to the butternut that I used last time, the olive isn't quite as long, but it is actually a little bit wider. So it's probably got about the same number of square inches in there. It's just that it follows the golden ratio. I cut a little more off the end that had the crack and the bark inclusion. And that crack there, I didn't manage to get rid of it completely. So I'm going to put a little bit of CA in there. But it doesn't seem to come out to the edge. It doesn't come to the top or bottom. So that's a good sign. Next, I'm going to try to get a read on the wood and decide which is going to be the top and which is going to be the bottom. So, this side seems to have the more interesting figure in it. So I think it makes sense to make that the bottom, because I'm going to end up scooping most of the top out. Now, the figure here would make a lovely bottom also, but I think this side is just a little bit better. And when I look at the sides and I kind of draw lines on there, if I go this way on, making that the top and that the bottom, there's more of the interesting figure that looks like it's going to maybe potentially stick around. I'm going to attach my faceplate with some fairly short screws. It's not going to have a lot of bite, but it should be just enough. Really, I can't go much deeper than that anyway, so I'll probably bring up the tailstock for some support while I'm doing the bottom. There she is all ready to go. I brought up the tailstock and I've put a piece of hardboard in there just to keep the spike from digging in, because I don't have enough material really if I get a big dig in from the spike on the tailstock. I don't have enough material to get down in there. So let's see how this does. I'll be able to do a little bit of the turning with this here, then I'm going to have to take it away and essentially hope and pray that my screws that are in there are pretty shallow hold. I'm probably somewhere in the neighborhood of about 1200 RPM, and because it's rectangular, you can see roughly where the center of it is. Now, great way if you want to break a finger is just to stick your finger right in there. You have to watch your knuckles, you have to watch everything when you do this. I am going to very gingerly try to take a cleaning pass on the end of it. I got my gouge nice and sharp, let's hope. That went well. I got a lot of the saw marks that were in there. They're going to go anyway because I'm going to be rounding this over, but this seems to be behaving okay. It's not chippy. I'm not too worried about the tailstock actually, so. Because of how incredibly dusty it is, I might have to turn on my dust collector. It smells like olives though, I'll tell you that. It's all I can smell right now is olives. Just getting my tailstock out of the way so I don't shove my elbow into it. And then I have to decide too, now that I've taken a cleaning pass, whether I want to have the tenon that I'm going to expand the chuck into small or large. That's a good question. Well, will large fit? Yeah, it would. Large would fit. If I do small I think is what I'm going to go for today. Because I'll have to make a little bit of a recess here. A little bit of a recess, and then I'm going to leave probably ½ an inch or so around the recess. And these jaws have a dovetail on them. So I'm going to undercut the recess so that it's got a reverse dovetail on it, and then this can expand into it and hold it quite well. And just from a design perspective, I think, yeah, smaller one's going to work better on something this size. I like a larger foot where possible, but I don't think it's the right thing today. Here are my dividers. I've got my dividers set to about the outside of the dovetail on my jaws when fully closed, and I need to transfer that over to here. Now these are steel and pretty sturdy. So one trick that you can use is you kind of eyeball it. It's kind of easy too. I've got a bit of a circle here from where I cleaned it up. I'm just going to bring up the tool rest slightly so it's closer to center. And what you'll do is it's turning this way. So you can touch with this side. You don't want to touch with this side or it'll throw your tool over on you. But you can kind of touch with one side and make a groove, and then you see if the other side wants to meet it. And if it doesn't, you can adjust it. And if it does, it gives you an idea. You've transferred the size of your chuck onto the bottom of the platter. Too big. That's slightly bigger than I want, but it's not bad. Now I'm going to take my parting tool. Just lower the tool rest here. I'm going to take my parting tool and I'm going to go into the inside of that line that I've created, and then we'll see if the chuck wants to fit in there. I'm trying to go very carefully so that I don't stress it, because those screws are not really all that long. Slow and steady wins the race. Let's see how we're doing here. Yeah. That wants to fit inside there. Now it's not deep enough. I need to make it go a little bit deeper. So that's what we'll do. You'd think that you needed to go really deep, you know, like a half an inch in there to get the holding power, but it's amazing how sturdy most species of wood are. Not every species. I've found things like mahogany not so sturdy, at least not for that purpose. But things like maple, ash, padauk, a lot of those things are quite good. So let's go a little deeper. Yeah, I think a little further. This is my dovetail tool. It's a little scraper that I can use to clean up the bottom, but that angle on there is the right angle to go inside of my chuck jaws. Tool rest is too low for this. Let's get it up there. How are we doing? Yeah, that should be good. Oops. Not bad. Yeah, I got to go a little further with it. I find sometimes I need to tip the corner of it to get it to really get in there. And I think I need to bring the tool rest up just a little bit more. Yeah. That should be a very sturdy hold. I ended up making it a little bigger than I wanted to. My chuck can kind of move around in there, but it'll expand in. Generally about the same size of it because, this is when it's round, but when it opens up, the four jaws open up, it's no longer a circle anymore, so you're not getting as much holding power on it as you had before. So, it starts to reduce the holding power from the center out. And if you get it where it's expanded all the way, you're just touching the very corners, the 8 corners. It's not giving you as much contact as you'd like to keep things steady and secure. But that much on a platter this size, I'm not worried about it. I have a little bit of torn grain there. Do I want to sand it or do I want to scrape it? Well, sanding sucks. So I've got my skew chisel, and I don't use it for much more than scraping, really. I am not a proficient skew chisel user. Give it a little touch up on the 600 grit. I find it's the best scraper I have. One day maybe I'll learn how to use the skew chisel. Then I won't be using it as a scraper anymore, or I'll still use it as a scraper. I don't know. So I'd rather cut than scrape. I would rather scrape than sand. And that's going to reduce my sanding time substantially. Now that I have this inside done, and I'm happy with the dovetail under there, nice and secure, now I have to decide about how big of a ring I'm going to make. The ring doesn't have to be huge, but it has to be meaty enough. So I want to make sure that I'm leaving enough wood here for design, but that the ring is good for sitting flat. I think roughly where I stopped when I was taking that first pass, I think that looks good. So that'll give it a nice base to sit on, I think. And it looks like it's about right proportionally to my eye. I don't have an extremely trained eye, but it works well enough. All right, I gotta bring that back down. And I'm gonna go on the outside of the line this time. All right, I went on the inside the last time because I wanted to stay inside of the line. This time I want to stay outside of it to not take any more than I have to off of this. And I like to go, personally, I like to go slightly deeper on this cut than I do on the inside. Just a little bit. Now we're going to start shaping it coming out here. Yeah, this could work. We're going to come back to the bowl gouge, and I'm going to start taking cuts this way on. Even though I'm pulling the gouge towards me, it's still called a push cut because the handle of the tool is pushing, it's trailing behind the cutting edge. There's something called a pull cut, which goes the other way, but I'm not quite as proficient at that. Might actually come in handy on a little thing like this. So I'm going to start by taking a few cuts off of it this way, and then I'll focus on the edge here. Shallow cuts, don't stress it out. I know it looks like I have quite a grip here, but I'm just resting my hand on the tool to keep it down on the tool rest, and that's it. And frankly, I don't even need to do that because the spinning wood would keep it down on the tool rest. So I'm not white knuckling this. Once I get out to where it's no longer square, out to the rectangular wings, it's going to get bumpy. Stop and check your work often. Yeah, a few chips have come off of it. Got to be really careful at the edge there, but it's early enough on that it's not detrimental. And even if it happens, when I get close to the finished area, there's ways I can fix it by doing an on-the-fly design change. Yeah, got to be very ginger at the parts where it's sticking out, where the wings come out. Right, and you got to check before you turn your lathe on that you don't have a bump on your tool rest either. All right, I'm just going to nibble those ends off very carefully. I'm using my gouge, what they call mostly closed. So if you have it turned where the flute faces you, or if you're going the other way, faces away from you, kind of at 3 o'clock or 9 o'clock, depending on how you look at it, I guess that would be 9 and that would be 3, then it doesn't take that big of a bite. But if you open it up like this, it'll take a huge bite. And so there's huge, and then it gets lesser and lesser and lesser as you turn it. And I have it turned almost sideways for these cuts, because I want to be very, very careful with it. I don't want to take big bites. With this kind of stuff too, you have to check often. It's not coming badly. Oh, pardon me. Dust. It definitely wants to chip here though. I'll be able to address that as I get out there, but something I have to be cautious of. The interesting thing is when I'm doing cuts too, my tool's over here, but I'm actually watching the line over here, so I'm not looking at my tool while it's cutting. Because it's a lot harder to see when you're on this side of the cut. You're over here looking at it. Well, you can't really see how big of a bite you're taking, but if you look over here, you can get a real sense for how deep your cut is. I'm actually going to increase the speed of the lathe. The faster you turn, the gentler your ride tends to be, to a certain extent, within reason. Yeah, that was a neat shaving. Look at that. Normally, on the bottom of the bowl, you want to cut this way on. You want to cut out this way. But I'm going in this way, trying to meet up with where I made the foot right there. So I will occasionally, just at this part, make a cut that way on. Yeah, so I've successfully come in and met that right there. And I almost have the curve I'm looking for. Not quite, but pretty close. Pretty close. But yeah, this side really wants to chip badly, so I'm going to have to fix that with sanding afterwards. So this side isn't chipping at all, which tells me that there's something here. The wood is just not quite as cooperative on this side. The figure is very different in it. It doesn't look great. So that little area right there is just going to be a problem. Well, fine. Got to keep the tool rest fairly close because I don't want the tool to start bouncing or flexing at the end. Yep, that about does it, except I have a little spot here. I could use a little touch of CA glue. So I'm going to do that off camera. Don't know if you can see that on camera. There's kind of some white speckles on there and it's kind of shiny. That's from the CA glue. The white foamy stuff is from where I use the activator to make it cure a little quicker. That'll come off anyway when I take a pass, because I'm just feeling here and I'm down a little further here than I am here. So I need to take another pass along here and let's see if I can clean it up. It's one of those ones where I've got to be definitely gentle and try to follow the curve. I'm trying to sight in my tool rest so it sits kind of along that curve. Yeah, still a little worried about this, but I can fix that up a bit. All right. Well, it doesn't hit the tool rest. Almost. Yep, that's good. I'm almost tempted to put some CI on the side here and see if that helps reduce the the chip out problem. But I'm probably going to take the whole side of it, in fact all 4 sides when I'm done, and just give it a quick hit on the belt sander. So it'll be all right. Close. I have to continue right here. Sometimes you take a pencil mark and it's just a little easier. I've turned the lathe up again too, just to try to reduce the chatter that's going on with this one. Yeah, bottom's a nice shape here. It's got a nice curve. Got some tool marks on there that I can use scraping and sanding. I think I could take one more slight pass there. And I might try with my smaller gouge just to see if it maybe hugs the curve a little better. Actually got a little thinner here than I wanted to be. Right, this right here is razor sharp, but when I hit it with the belt sander, it should be all right. I like how it's come out. I just need to do a little bit of scraping. If I can find, there it is, my gouge. Very, very lightly. You got to be very careful to keep the curve right kind of in the middle-ish on the thing here. When I get into the corner, what I do is I actually pivot the tool, right? I just kind of give it a bit of a pivot so I can get right in there. I'm exaggerating it for the camera, right? It would actually be right about there, but as soon as I see it just take the shaving off right at the corner there, I know that I've touched right in at this line. Yeah, this is taking the tool marks out nicely. It's going to be a little interesting getting out onto the wings. It always is terrifying. Let's hope I don't mess it up. This is a particularly thin piece of wood. This might have been the thinnest thing I've ever tried to do this with. It's getting there. Oh, I smell olives. Everywhere smells like olives in here. Which is not a bad smell at all. I actually hate olives. I hate the taste of them, but I like the smell of them. And I like olive oil. It's the strangest thing. Yeah, still got a little bit right there. That's a problem. Yeah, it's feeling really good. There's a little bit of a slightly raised area right here. Slightly raised, a little bit of torn grain. Yeah, we'll take care of that. And there's a little bit of a ridge here. Those lovely fine shavings coming off there. It shows you that I've got a bit of a burr on there that's doing its job. Oh, very close. Very close. We're in striking distance. When you're not just making this for, whatever, you kind of want to stop and make sure that everything is just so, even if it's a little bit of futzing around. I'm hoping this works out because there's a friend I want to give it to. He seems kind of fascinated with olive wood, and why not? It's a beautiful wood. I'm fascinated with it. Almost. All right, I think that's good there. So now I have to make it so this will sit level. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to use my skew chisel as a scraper. And I'm going to make that flat, but I'm going to angle it slightly in towards that so that it's slightly concave. So if you have a concave surface, it will sit on the table on just the very outer ring of it, and it won't wobble. Yeah, there's a slight tool mark there from when I was using the gouge earlier. So it needs a little work. If that doesn't come down nicely for me, you know what? I think I'm just going to use my bowl gouge just to trim that up a little bit. How's that for fine? You can get finer with certain cuts, but oh yeah, and that feels slightly convex. That's good. So now, just a little touch of scraping and it should be good. And how do you tell if it's convex? You take a flat tool like this, you sit it on the edge, and you look to see if you can see a little bit of light down at the corners. And if you can, and you should see just an increasing bit of, well, in this case it's not light, it's dark, but anyway, you can see an increasing gap. That that tells you that you're going from this being a little bit taller to this being just a little bit undercut. Exactly what we want. Now, my last thing is to touch up this here. I always hate doing this part of the foot. I always find I don't get the results I'm looking for, but that's okay. Most people aren't looking there when it's sitting on a table. And I forget how the expression goes. My wife always says it. Her grandparents used to say it, something like, you know, in 100 years, a blind man on a horse would never notice. Not bad. That's a lot better. Yeah, actually, that's a lot better. You know, olive wood does a nice job. Other than this little bit of chipping I got here, it seems to have been pretty sturdy and held up very well. All right, now comes the sanding. And of course, you can't really sand with it spinning when you got the wings. I can sand that with it spinning and out here, but when I get to the wings, not so much. I've also still got a bit of tool mark here, and I don't think I'm going to be able to get it out with my tools, so I'm going to have to get it out with sandpaper. In there, feels good enough to almost start with a very high grit. That's turned out very well. Pardon the pun. Here's a piece of 180. I might be able to start sanding at 180. I got to turn the speed way down. It feels almost like a shame, even going back to 180 grit, because it was so shiny. But this helps ensure that the tool marks are all out of it. Didn't have too many this time, actually. It's not bad. Either the wood is particularly nice, or I'm getting better at it, or some combination. So now I can do just kind of in here a little bit with it spinning, but out on the wings I'm going to have to hand sand it, and I'll sand it with the direction of the grain. And I'm not sure. Yeah, you can just see a little bit of sanding there. I don't know if it shows on video, but I can see some tool marks. So I may have to go down to 120 to sand that. It's almost hard to get in those little nooks and crannies. Sometimes what I do is I'll burn a line in there. That way it covers up the fact that sanding in there is a complete and total pain in the ass. So if any of my friends are watching this and you ever get a bowl and you see that I've put some burn lines in around here, it's because I didn't feel like sanding that part of it anymore. All right, so now I'm going to sand with the grain of the olive. The grain's running this way, so if you're, everybody sees, kind of, or sees or starts off, whatever, kind of sanding in circles. And that's not what you want to do. I'm going to lock the spindle so it doesn't move, and then I'm going to sand with the grain. That gives a lot better results because the fibers, as you're going with the grain, and as the grit on the sandpaper is pushing into them, the fibers seem to kind of get out of the way a bit as it's coming, right? So, so they kind of get out of the way. But if you go across, you get deeper scratches in it. So I don't want deeper scratches, because then you have to just keep going and going and going, and it's just an absolute pain. Most people that I know hate sanding. My son actually loves it, finds it very relaxing, and I find it to be a means to an end. Something I don't want to do, but if you don't do it, you don't get the results, so you should do it. You know what? I might not have to go down to the 120. I think this is going to be okay. There's one way I can tell, and that is to take a little tiny bit of denatured alcohol, just a little bit, and just take a look here, and none of those lines are showing up. It also gives you kind of a preview of the grain. Whew. It's not going to take much finish, and this is going to be really lovely. It's a very lovely wood. That's not so bad. So this is the process. This is the pain in the ass. And even where I've done the with the lathe running, I'll often give it a little bit of a touch with the grain, just to try to take out the circular scratches that run across the grain, and I find that that gives me just a little bit better results, in spite of the fact that it takes longer and annoys me. And that's pretty much the process that I'm going to use for this, is to, for each grit, I'm going to sand around here with the lathe running, and then I'll do hand sanding with the grain beyond that. Looks like the CA glue did its trick here. It sealed that up nicely. I'm going to do the rest of this off camera. Here we are back at the lathe. I've got it turned around onto the chuck. So the chuck expanded inside of that recess that I made. Now we're going to start very, very carefully carving out the middle. And it shouldn't take a lot. A lot of stopping and checking. If I can get this thickness about right, everything else just falls into place. And I kind of like, the way that's shaping up, actually. That feels pretty good. Getting there. With something thin like this, it's a game of inches. And they're getting there. I'm going to take down the rest of the center, I think. It's very much cut by cut. A lot of the times I'm marking the same spot because I didn't take it down enough, because I'm trying to sneak up on it very carefully. I'll switch over to my little guy here. Ooh, shavings are coming off really nice. Camera's just covered though. No, it's not suited for this one for some reason. Back to the big one. Pretty good. I got a bump right here, and I don't have a scraper that I can use on the inside very well. Oh, I have one, but I'm a little concerned about using it. It's a little too aggressive for that. I wonder if I can just take that off. Wouldn't that be nice? Yeah. Yep. I didn't get the pencil marks, but they'll sand out. So now I pretty much just have to do the bottom. I don't think it's going to be perfect. The outside curve and the inside curve should match, but it's just a little too fine. A little too fine of a bowl. And my skill's not quite there, frankly. I'm barely holding this. It's just kind of, just to get it lined up. And once it starts cutting, once it gets into the cut, the bevel of the tool sits into the cut, you know, the previous part of the cut, and it just rides nicely. And then you can steer it to make a deeper cut by pulling the handle away from you, and which causes the blade to tilt to go deeper in, or if you pull the handle back, then it'll come away, because you pull the handle towards you, now the blade's facing out of the cut. All right, how we doing? Pretty good. Pretty good. Take the rest of the center, and then it's going to be a question of sneaking up on the very bottom and hoping and praying that I don't go through. The closer to the center of the wood, the slower it's spinning. You might say, well, isn't it spinning at the same speed? Because, you know, the outside of it's spinning about 1300 RPM, the inside's spinning about 1300 RPM, right? But because the diameter on the inside is smaller, the feet per minute is a lot lower. So in that sense, it's spinning slower, and you can tell because the feet per minute are lower, it takes a lot longer. You just have to be patient and let the tool do the work. I had an instructor, didn't make sense at the time, but later it did, where he said, don't put the tool into the wood. Let the wood come to the tool. I'm like, well, the wood's stationary and the tool's not, so how's this going to work, buddy? But he said, well, okay. What you do is you present the tool to the wood, and you let the wood dictate how fast it wants the cut to go. Yeah, that makes sense. But I like his understanding it now. I like his kind of poetic way of putting it, where let the wood come to you. It feels right, even if it's maybe not quite as pedantic as one might like. Yeah, so there's a bit of a bulge out in the middle. It's not terrible. I want to find the beginning of it here with my fingers. Okay, right here is where it begins. See if we can get rid of that very carefully. If you were paying attention to that cut, you would notice that it started out very shallow and it got deeper as I went. It's because I was pushing the handle away from myself to try to get it to flow down in. Now, I didn't quite get there. I'm going to need another cut, starting right here, which is probably where I started last time, but that's okay. I did the same kind of cut again that time. Oh, we're so close. I want to say we're there. I don't want to take another cut because, you know, they say there's always time to mess up a project, right? Just one more cut, and before you know it, well, one more cut was one cut too many. I think I'm going to hit that with sandpaper. If I had a nice scraper, then that would be dandy, but I don't. I'm grabbing some of the shavings here for taking a picture at the end. Yeah, and up here, I'm going to tidy that up afterwards at the belt sander. I'm going to take down probably a little bit off of it and a little bit off each side, get them squared up nicely. I've got that chip out that happened when I was doing the outside of it over here. That's just funny why it happened there and not here, but anyway, that's the way it goes sometimes. But yeah, I think sanding will cover up a multitude of sins. And I think this time, because I've got quite a bit of tool marks in there, I can't really start at 180. I can't even start at 120. I'm going to start at 100. Anybody who's a really good wood turner would say, amateur. Actually, a lot of people who are good wood turners are pretty nice in the community and would say, here's some advice. And they would share their wisdom. Sometimes if I don't have the right thing for my power sander, I put a little power sanding attachment on my drill. I'll just stick the whole sheet to it, and I find that works pretty well. And I find it even lets me get closer to the edge here. I'm still going to have to do a lot of hand sanding, but I should be able to get the majority of it, hopefully, with the drill. And you know, I'm thinking I should take one more cut on that. Well, I'm going to see how it sands, and then I may come back and do another cut. I have to turn on the dust collector. Sorry, it's going to be loud. But if I'm using power sanding, you need the dust collector. One more cut. That feels nice and smooth and continuous all the way. Not the picture perfection, but you really have to feel it, and you have to really think about it to find where it's maybe slightly off. Not so bad. Not so bad. Okay, I'm going to go through the other grits off camera. Well, there's the inside. Sand it up to 320. If you look at the corners here and you say, dude, well, that's where I'm going to hit with the belt sander on those edges, and it'll take most of the corner off here, and then I'll sand whatever's left at the end there. It'll be pretty quick. To get a sense of what this grain is going to look like with finish on it, let's put on a little bit of denatured alcohol. This is kind of the fun thing. It helps wipe some of the sanding dust off. It also helps to raise the grain. I don't know really that Olive wants to raise, but then you can knock down the fuzz before you finish. But it shows you kind of approximately what it's going to look like. Look at that. Ooh, baby. Look at that. This is going to be lovely. All right. I'm going to pick it up after I do the belt sander stuff. And then after that, it's just a bit of finish. Incidentally, I have a good idea why it chipped out on this one side. So I put on the denatured alcohol and it's dried everywhere except for along here. This could be sapwood, and the sapwood might not be as tough as the heartwood on this. In most species, the sapwood is not as hard, but it's not as drastic as all this, right? That seems kind of, I don't know, punky or porous or something. All right, so it explains why it doesn't have as much figure. It looks very different and it behaves differently. What I did off camera was I took my adjustable square and I got just a little tiny bit sticking out there I got my pencil, got it really sharp, and I drew a series of lines. You can see a few of them here that are still left over. I got to sand those off, but it gave me an approximate idea of how much to take off all the way around and still keep it in the same proportion. So then I used my belt sander, starting with an 80 grit sanding belt and then a 220 grit sanding belt, and it is now square, well, rectangular. The corners are pretty good. A little bit of hand sanding still required. And I got rid of all of the chip out that was in that soft sapwood layer. I got all of that out. Now for some hand sanding. My belt sander, I took it up to 220, so I'm going to start at 320 on this. There are definitely some scratch marks in here. However, on the sides, it's not so bad because the belt sander was running this way on and the grain is running this way on. So the scratch marks are pretty good, but I just want to touch them up a little bit. And by using 320, I'll bring the sides up to the same grit as everything else. It's possible that 320 is not going to be aggressive enough for this. It'd be nice if the camera would stay focused. I may have to go back down to a finer grit, but we'll see. But regardless, this is going to be my process. I'm going to hand sand the sides. I'll flip over to the end grain. Now the end grain, there's actually, if I can get the camera to focus, there's substantial scratching along there, which makes sense because the grain is running this way on, but the belt sander was going this way on. So I'm going to have to do a lot of back and forth sanding. Yeah, and for this, I think I'm going to have to back down to maybe 180 or maybe even 120. I'll do that off camera, and then I'll come back at the very end. Now we're on to the final step, and arguably one of my favorite parts of the process, and that is finishing. Now, I would hate finishing the same as I hate sanding, except that I'm lazy about it. Here I have Doctor's Workshop Walnut Finishing Oil, which is just walnut oil. And then I have Doctor's Walnut Oil Paste Wax, which I think is just a mixture of walnut oil and carnauba wax. I got my wife to sign my initials and the year that I made this. I get her to do that because I am so terrible with wood burning. I just seem to have no dexterity. I'm just going to put a little bit of the oil on here, and then I'm going to wipe it in with a shop towel. I am so bad at writing my name with a wood burning tool. I did it once for a friend of mine when my wife was out of town, and my friend said, "Oh, you got to sign this thing that you made." Okay. And I signed it, and he was amazed that it was possible for any human being on earth to be that completely bad at something. So I get my wife to do it. A little more on here. In spite of the fact that it's incredibly shiny right now, and I mean the grain coming out is just lovely on this, but it will actually soak in and it will settle down to a very, very matte finish. And even when I put on the carnauba wax, it will still be a matte finish. So why don't I use something that gives a glossier finish, something that I could really buff up to a sheen? Well, sometimes I do. But most of the time, if something is going to be used for food or has the potential to be used for food, some walnut oil. It's a very quick, easy, repairable finish. And if somebody wants to refresh the finish, they could get walnut oil from the grocery store, or they could put on some mineral oil, and it would be just fine. Yeah, that's That's very nice. Very nice grain in that. All right, I'm going to let this soak in and apply a second coat of it. Wipe off the excess, and then we're going to apply some of the paste wax. There's the finished piece. Very happy with how this came out. The grain is lovely. The finish is nice and matte. I think my friend's going to be pleased with it. I hope so. All right, that's all there is for today. Hope you have a wonderful day and happy turning.